I never imagined that one visit to a lawyer's office could change my entire life. My name is Sophia, and up until that day, I believed I knew my family. I thought we had our moments of love, laughter, and understanding, that the bond one shared with my parents and my brother was solid. But life has a way of teaching you lessons when you least expect it, and sometimes, those lessons come dressed as betrayal. I walked into that office thinking it would be a simple conversation, a matter of paperwork, and I left feeling as if my entire world had crumbled. Sitting in the waiting room, I tried to calm myself. The walls were stark and neutral, the ticking clock echoing like a drum in the silence. My thoughts raced, not with fear, but with curiosity. My parents had mentioned updating their will, and I hadn't paid it much mind. It felt routine. But something in my gut whispered that today was different. There was tension in the air, a heaviness that I couldn't shake. I tried to smile at my reflection in the window, but it felt hollow. I didn't know then that in just a few moments, everything I believed about fairness, love, and family would be shattered. When the lawyer finally called me in, I took a deep breath, hoping for clarity, perhaps even reassurance. But as I walked in and saw the folder on the desk, my heart sank. I could feel the weight of every unopened page. The lawyer looked at me gently, her expression professional but sympathetic, and I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't going to be simple. She began speaking, her words calm, measured, but each one landed like a hammer. My parents had made their decisions, she said. My brother, he was the primary beneficiary of everything. And I was left with nothing. At first, I didn't comprehend it fully. Nothing. No house, no savings, no cherished family heirlooms. My stomach dropped as I tried to process what she had just told me. How could this be? I had spent my entire life thinking I was part of this family's future. I had shared birthdays, holidays, late-night talks, and memories that I thought were inseparable. And yet, in that moment, it felt like I had been erased, written out of a story I had always believed I belonged to. I felt blindsided, betrayed not by strangers, but by the people I loved most. The lawyer continued, explaining the reasoning, or what she called reasoning. My parents had their reasons, she said, citing my brother's achievements, his stability, the life they believed he could manage responsibly. But the words felt hollow. They didn't soften the blow. I didn't need explanations. I needed the acknowledgement of fairness, of love, of inclusion. Instead, I was left with shock, confusion, and a deep ache that gnawed at my chest. The betrayal wasn't in the law or the documents. It was in the people I trusted, the people I had loved unconditionally, who had chosen to leave me behind. I left the office in a daze, the city streets moving around me like a blur. I walked aimlessly, feeling both numb and enraged. My mind replayed every moment of my childhood, every interaction with my parents, searching for signs I might have missed. Was I not close enough? Was I too different? Too distracted with my own life? Too trusting? The questions spun endlessly in my mind, but none offered answers, only the cold realization that I had been excluded, intentionally and permanently. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the weight of betrayal pressing down. I cried, yes, but there was more than sorrow. There was anger, confusion, and a burning desire to understand why. I began reflecting on my relationship with my brother, trying to see if there had been warnings I ignored, subtle signs of favoritism, moments of deceit I overlooked. I realized that the pain wasn't just about the material loss. It was about the loss of trust, the loss of belief in the fairness of those I loved most. It was a lesson I hadn't asked for, but one I needed to face. In the days that followed, I collected myself, determined to process the shock with clarity. I spoke with the lawyer again, asking questions, seeking details, making sure I fully understood the extent of the inheritance. Every page I reviewed, every clause I examined, revealed the depth of the decision, and yet it also revealed an opportunity, a chance to reclaim my dignity, to confront the reality without losing myself to anger. I realized then that the true betrayal was not just the exclusion, but the way it had been done so casually, without acknowledgement or care for my feelings. I thought about my parents endlessly, trying to reconcile the love I had known with the choices they had made. It was difficult, even painful, to separate the acts of kindness, the shared memories, the warmth I had felt, from this calculated exclusion. But I knew I had to. clinging to nostalgia, or hope would only keep me trapped in the shadow of betrayal. I had to move forward, even if the path was unclear. That's when I began to plan, not for revenge, not for malice, but for clarity and closure. I needed to face my brother, to understand the unspoken dynamics, and to ensure my voice was acknowledged in the story of my family's legacy. The first step was observation. I began noting patterns, recalling interactions, and reflecting on moments where favoritism or subtle deception might have been at play. My brother had always been charming, competent, and undeniably successful. But charm can mask selfishness, and competence can mask disregard. I saw now that I had ignored small signs, overlooked moments of manipulation, and allowed assumptions to cloud my judgment. The realization was painful, but it also empowered me. Awareness became my first tool, clarity my first weapon. I also began reaching out to friends and relatives I trusted, carefully discussing the situation without allowing anger to cloud my communication. Their reactions were mixed, some shocked, some sympathetic, some uncomfortable. But each conversation reinforced one thing: the truth could not be denied, and while the exclusion was cruel, it was not irreversible in terms of emotional closure. I could confront, I could demand acknowledgement, and I could reclaim my dignity without descending into anger or chaos. That realization gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt since receiving the shocking news. As the weeks passed, I carefully reconstructed my plan to address the situation. I wouldn't attack or humiliate. I would reveal the truth, expose the unfairness, and hold the people responsible accountable in a way that was undeniable and dignified. I documented my observations, prepared my points, and rehearsed how to communicate my feelings clearly and assertively. The power of preparation gave me confidence. I understood that emotional composure, combined with clarity and strategy, was more potent than rash confrontation or passive resentment. I also reflected on my own growth. This experience, painful as it was, revealed inner strength I hadn't fully recognized. I had endured shock, heartbreak, and betrayal, and yet I could still act with purpose and integrity. That resilience became my anchor. I realized that the story was no longer just about what I had been denied. It was about how I chose to navigate the betrayal, how I reclaimed control, and how I ensured that my voice and perspective were heard. When the day came to speak with my brother, I approached it with calm precision. I didn't allow anger to dominate. I allowed truth to guide me. I recounted the events, expressed my feelings, and confronted the choices that had excluded me. His reactions were telling, not just words, but subtle shifts in expression, hesitation, and defensiveness. I realized then that exposure doesn't require shouting or dramatics. It requires clarity, confidence, and the courage to face deception head-on. By the end of the conversation, something shifted. Not everything was resolved, but acknowledgement had been given. My voice had been heard, my feelings recognized, and my perspective considered. I left the meeting with a sense of empowerment. I had faced the betrayal with integrity and had reclaimed my narrative. The journey was far from over, but the first steps toward healing, dignity, and self-respect had been taken. In the weeks and months that followed, I focused on rebuilding, not just my life, but my confidence, my relationships, and my sense of purpose. I engaged in activities I loved, connected with supportive friends, and set clear boundaries with those who had betrayed me. Each action reinforced my independence and reminded me that while material inheritance is finite, personal empowerment is limitless. I had survived betrayal, and in doing so, I discovered my own strength, resilience, and clarity. After the initial confrontation with my brother, I realized that healing was going to be a process, not something that happened overnight. Every day presented a new challenge, a new reminder of the betrayal. But I refused to let the pain define me. Instead, I chose to observe, to reflect, and to grow stronger. I began spending more time on myself, reconnecting with hobbies and interests I had neglected, exploring passions that reminded me of who I truly was beyond the shadow of family expectations. I also started to reach out to friends and distant relatives who had witnessed the family dynamics over the years. I asked questions, not accusatory, but inquisitive, trying to understand the reasoning behind decisions, the patterns of favoritism, and the subtle manipulations that I had once overlooked. Listening to their perspectives gave me clarity. It wasn't just about what was taken from me, it was about understanding the environment that allowed such exclusion to happen. And in that understanding, I discovered empowerment. Knowledge became a tool I could wield with calm precision. Some days were harder than others. Memories of shared childhood, laughter, and love resurfaced unbidden, blending with the sting of betrayal. I would walk through old family photographs, remembering birthdays, holidays, and small daily moments that once seemed trivial but now carried bittersweet weight. I allowed myself to feel all the emotions, the sadness, the confusion, the shock, but I refused to let them control me. Each wave of emotion became a reminder of resilience, of the strength that had carried me this far and would carry me further. I also began to examine my brother more carefully. Our interactions revealed subtle truths I hadn't noticed before, how he would try to maintain control in conversations, how he expected certain loyalties, and how he relied on charm to smooth over uncomfortable truths. Understanding him didn't make me bitter, it made me aware. Awareness became my shield. I learned that clarity isn't just about recognizing deceit, it's about positioning yourself so that deception cannot harm you again. As I grew stronger, I started documenting everything, not as evidence for confrontation, but as a record of my journey, a way to track patterns and understand dynamics. I wrote down conversations, observations, and feelings, creating a personal guide to navigate both my relationships and my emotional state. This exercise wasn't about obsession, it was about reclaiming control. Writing became therapeutic, a way to transform pain into insight, confusion into clarity. Slowly, I began to rebuild relationships that mattered, those that had been strained or overlooked. Friendships became deeper because they were chosen and nurtured, not inherited or expected. I recognized who valued honesty, who offered genuine support, and who could be trusted with vulnerability. The betrayal I had suffered didn't make me close off. It made me selective, deliberate, and appreciative of the connections that were genuine. I had learned to value substance over appearance, authenticity over charm. I also learned to redefine my sense of worth. For years, I had measured myself in relation to my family, their expectations, and their favoritism. But the exclusion forced me to reflect on who I was, independent of their judgment. I began setting personal goals, focusing on achievements and passions that were mine alone. With each small victory, each milestone, I felt more grounded, more confident, and more resilient. The betrayal that had once felt like a crushing blow became the catalyst for growth and self-realization. There were moments when I had to navigate social circles carefully. Friends and acquaintances had heard fragments of a story, some offering sympathy, others judgment. I learned to respond with calm clarity, not defensiveness or aggression. I realized that composure was more powerful than confrontation. By presenting myself as collected, confident, and truthful, I ensured that my narrative wasn't hijacked by gossip or misinterpretation. Integrity, I discovered, carries its own influence. I also spent time reflecting on forgiveness, not necessarily toward my parents or my brother, but for myself. I needed to release lingering resentment to truly reclaim my emotional space. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't excusing the betrayal, it was acknowledging the pain, understanding it, and moving forward without carrying the weight of anger. Each time I let go of bitterness, I felt lighter, freer, and more capable of embracing life fully. This practice of self-compassion became an anchor during moments of doubt or lingering hurt. One of the most profound realizations came when I considered the ripple effects of betrayal beyond myself. I thought about how our choices impact others, friends, family, even strangers who might be caught in the fallout of our decisions. I realized that while my parents' actions had caused pain, my response could create clarity and healing, not just for me, but for others. I could model integrity, composure, and thoughtful action, showing that strength is not measured by retaliation but by self-awareness and dignity. I also discovered the power of reflection and patience. I learned not to react impulsively to emotional triggers, but to step back, observe, and choose the most constructive response. This patience became a superpower, allowing me to navigate interactions with both my family and social circles without being dominated by anger or sorrow. I realized that timing and emotional control can be more influential than forceful confrontation, and that subtle, deliberate actions often create the most profound results. As I rebuilt my life, I found joy in independence. Simple daily activities, taking a walk in the park, enjoying a book, or pursuing a hobby, became reminders that happiness is not dictated by others' choices. I also embraced opportunities for personal growth, learning skills, exploring passions, and setting boundaries that protected my emotional well-being. Each decision reinforced the sense of control I had regained, a control that no betrayal could ever fully take from me again. Through this journey, I also realized the importance of documenting lessons learned. Not just for myself, but for others who might experience similar heartbreak. I began to articulate my insights clearly: how to recognize subtle favoritism, how to reclaim dignity after exclusion, how to process betrayal without losing yourself. I understood that sharing these lessons could offer guidance and comfort to others facing similar challenges, turning my painful experience into a source of empowerment and insight. In moments of quiet reflection, I consider the concept of fairness and justice. Life isn't always fair, I realized, but that doesn't mean we are powerless. How we respond, how we navigate injustice, defines our character and shapes our future. I chose to act with integrity, patience, and clarity, demonstrating that strength comes from composure, strategy, and self-respect, rather than anger or impulsivity. The betrayal had tested me, but it had also revealed a resilience I hadn't fully recognized. As life slowly returned to a new normal, I began to notice how much I had changed. The shock of betrayal, the exclusion from my parents' will, and the confrontation with my brother had all left deep marks, but they had also revealed strengths I didn't know I had. I was more aware, more discerning, and more confident. I realized that betrayal doesn't have to destroy you. It can awaken a clarity, a focus, and a resilience that transforms pain into growth. I spent more time nurturing myself and my passions. Things I had put aside, reading, writing, exploring new skills, became part of my healing. I realized that reclaiming control over my own life, rather than obsessing over what had been taken, was the most powerful response. Every small choice, every new experience, reinforced the sense that I was in charge of my future. Betrayal may have closed one door, but it opened many others that I hadn't even considered. Observing my family from a distance became another lesson. I noticed patterns, dynamics, and behaviors I had ignored before. Understanding these didn't fuel bitterness, it empowered me. Awareness became a shield, insight became a tool, and patience became my ally. I learned that you cannot always change other people, but you can choose how you respond, how you protect yourself, and how you grow stronger from the experience. I also began reaching out to friends who had supported me quietly. Their encouragement and honesty reminded me that loyalty and love exist outside of betrayal. I strengthened those bonds, appreciating authenticity over appearances. I realized that sometimes the family we are born into is not the family we lean on emotionally. Support and trust are earned, chosen, and nurtured, and I made a conscious effort to invest in relationships that honored honesty, compassion, and integrity. Throughout this journey, I reflected deeply on fairness, justice, and personal growth. Life isn't always fair, and people aren't always kind, but we have the power to navigate challenges with dignity. I realized that revenge isn't about causing harm, it's about reclaiming your power, exposing truth, and protecting yourself emotionally. By acting with composure, strategy, and clarity, I could ensure that betrayal no longer held sway over my life. One of the most important lessons I learned was the value of forgiveness, not necessarily for those who wronged me, but for myself. Letting go of anger and resentment allowed me to move forward without being anchored to the past. Forgiveness became a gift I gave myself, a release of emotional weight, and a way to create space for personal growth, joy, and empowerment. I realized that holding on to bitterness only prolongs suffering, whereas clarity and acceptance allow life to continue with purpose. I also discovered the importance of documenting lessons, not for blame, but for understanding. By reflecting on every detail of the betrayal, I learned to recognize subtle signs of favoritism, manipulation, and deception. I understood that being observant and cautious doesn't make you cynical, it makes you prepared. Life is full of challenges, but clarity and awareness help you navigate them without being consumed by the actions of others. As I rebuilt my life, I made conscious choices to focus on independence, purpose, and authenticity. Every decision, whether personal or professional, was guided by the wisdom I had gained. I surrounded myself with people who valued honesty, nurtured meaningful connections, and maintained boundaries that protected my emotional well-being. Each step forward reinforced the truth. Betrayal cannot diminish your worth unless you allow it to. Reflecting on the entire experience, I realized that betrayal is not just a painful ending, it is also an opportunity for transformation. It teaches resilience, clarity, and self-respect. It forces reflection, encourages observation, and cultivates patience. Most importantly, it reminds you that while others may act unfairly, you have the power to respond with dignity, insight, and strength. That realization became my guiding principle as I moved forward, no longer defined by betrayal, but empowered by it. Now, when I think back on that day in the lawyer's office, I no longer feel the same shock or helplessness. I feel gratitude for the lessons learned, for the resilience discovered, and for the clarity gained. I know that life will always present challenges, but I also know that I am capable of facing them, learning from them, and emerging stronger. Betrayal may test you, but your response defines you, not the actions of those who sought to undermine you. For anyone listening, I want you to know this. Betrayal is painful, unfair, and shocking, but it also carries a hidden gift. It teaches you about yourself, about your boundaries, and about the people truly worthy of your trust. Strength isn't about retaliation, it's about reclaiming your life, your dignity, and your clarity. Every heartbreak, every disappointment, and every exclusion is an opportunity to grow stronger, wiser, and more empowered than ever before. If this story resonates with you, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Mortal Revenge for more stories of truth, exposure, and personal empowerment. Remember, betrayal may hurt, but it can also awaken the strength you never knew you had. And now I leave you with a question to reflect on. If you were left out when it mattered most, how would you rise to reclaim your power in your life?